This novel, I think, is very special, and I'm incredibly impressed that it is your first novel. Portraits of countries are difficult to paint. It's very easy to make a caricature of a place or to get so lost in your favorite details that the grander scope is missed. By focusing on the lives of three characters who witness and misunderstand the cry Fidel has fallen, Huergo has forced us to examine our own values. What's worse, the death of our state leader and the disappointment of a revolution, or the loss of our neighbors, children, and how easily we can move on? This exceptional novel delves into history, humor, neighborhood, and state politics bravely and with vigor. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
My goodness. It's really an extraordinary honor to be here. This is Politics and Prose, and it is an absolutely amazing place. And I want to thank the owners of Politics and Prose and also the incredible and hardworking and creative staff for the invitation to read here this evening. And it's an extraordinary opportunity for a first-time novelist. And to this lovely audience, thank you. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, because it's lovely to look out and see so many people that I know, and I thank you for that. This isn't just a bookstore, it's an independent bookstore that's also an institution locally and nationally. As a matter of fact, if any of you happen to have seen the latest issue of Washingtonian, you'll notice that there's an interview there with Barbara Mead, who was the former co-owner of this wonderful place. And the interviewer asked Barbara Mead what makes for a good public reading. And she says, well, the author has to have a gift for public speaking. And she goes on to say, I've always said there's a contradiction in the two qualities you have to have as a writer. You have to have the ability to tolerate a lot of isolation while reading your book, but when your book is finished and you have to go out and promote it, you've got to be the most gregarious person there is. And I thought to myself, I can do that. I'm a Gemini. I can be introverted. I can be extroverted. I can do it in 2 languages. Not a problem. Then I continued reading, and the interviewer asked Barbara Mead whether she gave authors tips before the reading, and she answered, these authors should talk informally, passionately, and not for too long. After 25 minutes, you are going to lose the audience, and you're going to lose sales, and I thought, I'm going to keep it short. No problem there. Then the interviewer, in a more speculative sort of mode, asked Barbara Mead if there have ever been any readings that were real clunkers. Barbara Mead was very demure, very diplomatic, and she said, I don't think I could name names, but a disproportionate number have been professors. I can't tell you exactly why. Well, I'm not going to tell any of you what my day job is, okay? Just going to keep away from that. But I wanted to let you know that I've selected just a couple of short readings. I'll start one, maybe 5 minutes or so, and then I just wanted to open up the floor to any questions that you might have, or comments, etc. So let's see. The Death of Fidel Pérez. See if I can find. Well, this one is for Diana Martin, who likes this passage especially. Okay? Saturnina sangrando vino a decirnos el destino. Girando viene las sayas sangrosas, girando va contando muertos como losas. I begin her chapters with a little bit of Spanish doggerel. Saturnina watched the crowd coalesce and begin to make its way to the plaza. She felt the press of an invisible hand at her back, propelling her away from the commotion, pushing her across the city as if she must mark the hour of doom and salvation. She moved toward the trees in the square, toward the grass tamed into rectangles by the surrounding brick. She felt the tiny green teeth of each blade biting her ankles, pressing against her flesh. She watched as the blades of grass changed color, no longer green, but turquoise, like the morning sky. She saw the drops of water from the pre-dawn rain coagulating on the bricks before her, their shiny translucence unaltered by the tread of broken shoes. The trees in their prison rectangles stretched into the dome of morning sky and smiled at her, despite their sorrows, all the while plunging deeper into the earth and beyond their visible prison. She touched the dark-stained bark, rough-furrowed cloak that channeled the rain deeper into the roots, and looked up to see the massive limbs jostled by the breeze, with each movement reframing segments of the sky. Dime, she whispered to the bark. Tell me, can you hear me? The cars sputtered along both sides of the avenue. The houses shrank imperceptibly into the soil, their movements glacier-like. Their faces reflected Saturnina's own, unshuttered, broken by time, entire pieces missing and yet insistent. They held within themselves a series of histories, of those who had lived and died within those walls, and of those who had come here to imagine and then build them. When I stand here, Saturnina began to tell the tree, I feel heaven. The Lord dangles me head down by the ankles. Then I stretch my arms out toward the world. He massages the soles of my aching feet and helps me through another day. He pulled my son Tomas up into the heavens and held him safely in his arms until today. Batista's men, the ones who killed Tomas, the Lord let go of their ankles long ago. The Lord sent them spinning into oblivion. Saturnina felt the press of the invisible hand propelling her forward again. She hobbled along as quickly as her aching knees would carry her. She passed the ruined buildings, the mosaics on each facade shattered by time. She could feel the tesserae striking the ground, her heart constricting as each one began to dissolve into the dust. She felt obliged to stop and rescue as many as she could, placing them carefully in a small pouch by her side. She liked to hear the tesserae clicking, rubbing against one another, the soft swoosh of her many skirts, and the counterpoint of colorful marble. She liked to collect these pieces every day, and then at nightfall empty the pouch on the floor of the broken attic she called home. She would light a candle, arrange the tesserae by color and pattern, and whisper a prayer to the God who held her ankles so delicately that he might watch over these hardened tears that dropped from her buildings, just as he watched over her son in heaven. Short? Okay. You're very generous. Would you like to just chat a little bit? Yes? Some of you are nodding yes. Okay. You want to read another one? Read the opening? The very beginning? Oh. The very opening. Okay. This is Richard Peabody, by the way. This is an extraordinary writer and mentor to many. So I'm honored. Thank you, Richard. Some 50 years after the 1953 Moncada Army Barracks raid, at nearly 7 o'clock on the morning of July 26th, and at just the moment when the sun's rays rose magically from the edges of the earth, Fidel Pérez, who had already ingested a quart of chispa de tren, the cheapest beer his younger brother Rafael had found on the black market, was nursing a badly broken heart. This Fidel, a dissolute, angry Romeo bereft of his tatty Juliet, stepped out onto the balcony that ran the full perimeter of his brother's apartment to face the dawn. Lacking all appreciation for the morning's charms, he belched loudly, raised both fists, and furiously jabbed his middle fingers toward the sun as if it were the miserable slut who had betrayed him the week before. Infuriated at the sun's ambivalence, he leaned over the railing and shouted down at the balcony 2 floors below his, where he knew the middle-aged Isabel must still be sleeping, her husband beside her. Isa, Isa, te amo. Isa, eres mía, mía solamente. The alcohol that after a week of drinking allowed him to lower his manly guard and sob openly also slurred his speech. So even Rafael, in the kitchen making coffee, his head splitting in pain, was startled by his brother's sudden patriotic fervor for the isla, the island, with which, oddly enough, Fidel seemed so consumed that morning. Rafael had never known his brother to insist so adamantly on how much he loved the isla, how much the isla belonged to him only. Rafael was smiling, having just realized what Fidel was actually shouting about when he heard the sound of the balcony and its rusted iron balustrade giving way. "Hijo de la gran puta!" Fidel screamed, the hum of alcohol in his brain giving way to terror. Rafael dropped the hot coffee and ran to the edge of the broken balcony just in time to see Fidel clinging, his fingers wrapped tightly around the balustrade, his body dangling in midair. "Socorro! Fidel se cayó! Help! Fidel's fallen!" Rafael shouted, shocked by the fragility of life. In that moment, Rafael's cry for help was both practical, an expression of his desire to save the hard-drinking older brother he loved, and incantatory, a plea cast like a magical spell, a wish that this evil fork itself onto a different path, and that this terrible misfortune belonged to some other Fidel. Rafael lurched over the broken threshold and grabbed fast to his older brother's forearms, but the weight of Fidel's body was too much, or the strength of Rafael's grip too little, or the decay of the balcony too extensive. Justicio, their neighbor directly across the street, was carefully wheeling his bicycle cab out of the communal garage on the ground floor when he heard an uncannily familiar voice shouting about his love for the island, and then a horrible rending sound he couldn't identify. Justicio looked up just in time to see the Perez boys falling in a terrible embrace, tumbling headfirst toward the front garden that had been covered in concrete so many years earlier. He watched their bodies strike the concrete, though it took him what seemed an eternity to absorb what he had witnessed. Okay? Questions? Yes, hi.
If you could, that'd be great.
They're recording this for posterity or blackmail, who knows? One of the two.
I have two questions.
Please.
First of all, how did you choose your subject?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, how did you get published? Could you just tell us a bit about the story? Because I hear I'm not a writer, but I hear it's notoriously difficult, especially
Yes.
for a first novel,
Yes.
to have anyone take you seriously.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that personal journey and how you had the confidence to believe in yourself and get it published to the form where it is today?
To answer your first question, I'm Cuban, and I came to this country at a very early age as a political refugee. So, being able to tell that story has been a part of my consciousness my whole life, right? In terms of getting published, it is very difficult. I wrote and wrote and wrote. And I also had the grace of an extraordinary teacher, Richard Peabody. And actually, several of his students are in this group here today. And I listen to a really good teacher because I've been in the classroom for so many years, and I know when a student is listening, and I can see the struggle of students who don't listen, who sort of shut you out. And I made a point of listening to Richard very closely. And when Richard, for example, when it came time to develop a cover letter, Richard said, you have to pitch your entire novel in one sentence. And most of the people in the class told him couldn't be done. They resisted it. And I went home And I wrote pages and pages and pages, and I knew that wasn't right, and I kept trying and trying, and I finally got one sentence, and I brought it to class the following week, and I had it, and he was happy with it. And I sent it out to agents. I made batches, lists of agents, researched them, had my first batch of 10. I decided I was going to proceed by 10. And I sent the first 10 out, and his advice was so good, I got 8 agents, 80%, which is outrageous, outrageous, yeah. The death of Fidel Pérez is a story told by Che Guevara and overheard by Italo Calvino. Yeah. And then he okayed it. And I paid attention. So he said one sentence, and I took him very literally, yeah. So he said, you know, agents, they don't want to hear pages and pages of information about how meaningful this journey has been. About how meaningful this journey has been, or how much the manuscript means to you, or anything like that. You know, this is different. What you're doing here is different. And I followed his instructions. And then I had the grace of getting an agent who, it was incredible, really. She had majored in, young woman, and she had majored in English and Latin American history. So that was really extraordinary. And the other thing that Richard told me is to select an agent, make sure that the agent loves your work. And she did. She did. And so that, she really sold it. So I felt very blessed by that. Okay. Other questions? That's it? Next? Oh. Next book is called Between Anna and Ella. And here's my one-sentence elevator pitch. It's sort of a Latina Grapes of Wrath. There you go. Yes, sir.
Tell us a little more about how the book and its plot relates to your personal odyssey and your current thinking and feeling about present-day Cuba.
Well, in terms of present-day Cuba, I think that... Oh, I beg your pardon. I think present-day Cuba suffers unnecessarily from the embargo. I think the embargo is pointless and extremely hurtful. In terms of my own personal journey, I started writing this shortly after I returned from a trip to Cuba, the first since I had left as a very little girl. And I was just haunted by certain things that I experienced there and that I saw. And the character of Saturnina, I saw her, I met her, as I was walking through one of the oldest parts of La Habana. El Vedado is one of the oldest sections of Havana, or the oldest section of Havana. And there were these beautiful blue and white tiles and on the facade of a building. And they were intact. Everything around them was in ruins. And it was such a historical moment because those tiles were architectural relics of historical value. They pointed back to Spanish colonialism. It pointed back to the influence of the Moors in Spain, who taught the Spaniards to make those arabesques, etc. So it was an amazingly resonant moment, seeing those tiles. And I was ready to walk through the doors, and I was expecting, a grand foyer. And instead, I walked through, and I looked up, and the building was mostly gone. And when I looked up, the stairwell was still intact, and at the very top on the landing was an old woman in a rocking chair. And I felt like the most amazing klutz because I had, I was going to take a picture and I just didn't realize the devastation. I was expecting an intact building. And she looked down at me and she was so regal. And in all her poverty and all her misery, she was so regal and she was literally skin and bones. And I just felt very embarrassed and, of course, would not take a picture. But it was as if she sort of nodded at me, and she followed me all the way home. And I called her Saturnina because Saturnina was a character in my mother's stories about Remedio. Raise your hand, Mom, so everybody can see you. There you go. And Saturnina was someone who decided one day to just put all her clothes on and walk out into the middle of the street. So that's where she came from.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, this is Noah Baum. Noah Baum is the most extraordinary oral storyteller here in the DC area. She's also known nationally, and she is incredible. No, I always go to the Smithsonian to take storytelling classes from her. She's extraordinary. I hope you have your card out today because actually, there were times when I was stuck and I would enroll in a course with Noah. Seriously, all joking aside. And there was something about, well, Noah is fantastic. And she's an exquisite storyteller. And she taught me something about standing on your feet and telling a story. And there was something about the quickness of that that taught me how silly perfectionism was. So she was a kind of therapy for me. She's wonderful. Oh, that's okay. She's always at the Smithsonian.
Well, I was just curious to ask how long it took you to write this?
8 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, 8 years. I'm slow. I struggled with it. I taught myself to write a novel. I wasn't just writing a novel. I was teaching myself how to write a novel.
I just love the little bits that you read. I can't wait to read it, and I just love the humor that comes out. It's just
Cool.
fantastic.
If you want to perform any parts of it, good with me.
To practice the Cuban accent.
You can do it. You can do it in Yiddish. It's all right. It's all right. Because I've told you this before. Once you do bits about your mom, it's in Yiddish. It's like my mom in Spanish. It's the same thing. No difference whatsoever. Thank you for your friendship, Varda. Thank you very much.